Welcome back to Heritage and Hope Ministries. I'm your host, Alex, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother, James. James, thank you for joining me here today. And I'm also joined by Aaron, who's been on here with us many times before. And we're also joined by a new guest, Vaughn Williams. And I believe you are actually, you're the treasurer for AudioVerse. Is that correct?
That's right.
Well, very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us and coming on to discuss what's been going on in society and in the news that is pushing us towards this prophetic end that we know is coming upon the world. There's been a lot that has happened. This is January when we are recording this, but there's been events that have been unfolding in December leading into the new year that have been quite momentous. Have you guys seen quite a bit that's been going on in the news?
Oh, yeah. Definitely. Yep.
So I actually kind of put together a little compilation of some of the clips that we've seen thus far. Some of these are older, some of these are newer, but this is just a brief little compilation so that our viewer can understand just how society is being pushed to a certain end. Let's take a quick look.
Well, you're a Christian nationalist. You want the kingdom to be the government. Yes. You want God to come and overtake the government. Yes. Guilty as charged.
You actually don't need like a majority support of the population. You just need a strong-willed minority. And then that ruling class can shape the imagination of the majority. There's a lot of people who will just kind of shift with the imagination set by the people, the ruling class.
All the 10 Commandments must be legislated and make it clear to everyone which Sabbath we're in favor of.
The civil law can also include, I think, blasphemy laws, Sunday Sabbath laws. People ask me, what laws would you want? I think having blue laws, the Sunday Sabbath laws, really is the first thing that happened. Like, it's not blasphemy laws, it's not, laws against heretics.
And how he weaves in all these different interesting facts and history of the Sabbath, and then even certain laws like blue laws that we had here in this country, and how we have changed without having that rest built into our country.
You're the people that I want to hear from. That's why we go to church on Sundays, that you should be the most powerful people on earth. They say separation between church and state, they told me. I said, all right, let's forget about that for one time. We're bringing religion back to our country.
We might structure our civil affairs such that on the one day in 7, which God has deemed holy, we rest from our work and worship Him. This civil and public acknowledgement should certainly be formalized in our governing documents.
We've shown up to teach you to obey. And immediately they're like, this is jihad. Immediately, this is Sharia law. Because they feel the force. In some sense, you just have to lean into it. You can't back down on the obedience part.
Right.
You just like, we're absolutely here to teach people to obey the standard.
Yeah.
Our concern is that long-term down the road, our people are going to be facing imprisonment in the future as they did back in 1888.
And if that were to happen, that would be bad. But it would be way better than what you're going through now.
How so?
You said earlier that you want this to be a Christian world.
Yes.
So you want to supplant their religion with your Christian.
Yes.
So what do you guys think of some of those clips there?
There's a lot in there.
Wow. It's not subtle.
No, it's not subtle, and it's really starting to come to the forefront. It was kind of spoken in silence in back rooms, but I think you're starting to see it burst out into social media posts, to news articles, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all the major media outlets that people are consuming time on. It's being pushed.
It amazes me that people look at this and still doubt where this is going.
Right.
I mean, that's the surprising part for me. But
a large part of this is actually coming from the Christian Nationalist movement specifically. And a lot of people, if they haven't heard the term Christian Nationalist, they get this idea of like, well, what's wrong with just being a patriotic American who's also a Christian? And that's what they think Christian nationalism is. But that's not really what Christian nationalism is about. One of the main ways that you can understand the Christian nationalist mindset is their view of end times. It is entirely antithetical to our own. We believe that we are going to face progressive, more natural disasters, more economic ruin, and it's going to lead to a time of trouble. And then Christ is going to come in the absolute darkest hour and save his people, and we're going to go to heaven for a 1,000-year reign with Christ in heaven before the new city, the New Jerusalem, descends to this earth. However, the Christian nationalist mindset about the millennium is entirely different. And I think that is a really key apart, go ahead and take a listen to this next clip here that talks about their view on the millennium.
Then you have postmillennial. And if premillennial means Christ comes back prior to the millennium, postmillennial, the technical view is that Christ's rule and reign increases, and it leads to a 1,000-year golden age. Now, this 1,000-year golden age is not heaven. Sin and death are not fully put away, but it's basically Christ's kingdom has extended over all of the earth. I think of passages in Isaiah that talk about the youth living until, is it 100 or 120?
100. Yeah, the youth shall die at 100. Also, no more shall die in infancy.
Exactly.
So abortion would be done. Also, miscarriages, these kinds of things.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean, again, it's a good point. It doesn't mean because we're in heaven and death doesn't exist anymore, the youth shall die. Shall die. But what it is saying is that if somebody dies at 100 years old, you would say, oh, he was so young. So elongated lifespans, no more death in infancy. The leopard shall lie down with the lamb. The nations shall no longer be at war. They shall beat their swords into plowshares. So there'd be a world peace, elongated lifespans, the full and totalizing Christianization of the nations. All the nations would be Christian. That doesn't mean each and every individual person in each nation is truly regenerate. So you still have sin. You still have unbelievers in the eternal, ultimate sense. You still have death, right? So it can't be speaking of heaven.
Right.
And yet, the picture that Isaiah, I believe it's chapter 65, gives us is still a golden age. Not heaven, but a golden age before the final physical return of Christ.
And so true postmillennialism, there's some postmillennials that would say, I believe that things get better and better, but not necessarily a literal golden age. That technically would belong under a subset of amillennial. Now, with postmillennial, 1,000-year golden age that Christ rules and reigns. And at the end of it, you have here this little season in which Satan is loosed. And one last time he goes out and it shows humanity, like we said, sin and death. Those things are still real. He still manages to deceive nations. And as we can tell from the text, a number of the nations join him and they rally together and they say, you know what? Enough of these saints, enough of God, enough of Christ's rule. I think we'll have it our way. And that is the final judgment in which fire comes down from heaven.
So what are your guys' thoughts on the idea of postmillennialism?
Well, it's completely unbiblical, but I want to give you guys a chance first, but I've got a few more scriptures to share on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a misunderstanding of what we know about prophecy, and what we read in Daniel and Revelation goes completely against that.
What came to mind for me was how through history, when religion becomes forced, it's a false, any religion that is based on force is a false system, a false religion. And what I don't understand is the way they see this and the way they're pushing it is opposite of God's character. God is not a God of force. And
it's free will.
It's free will.
Right.
What about free will? Doesn't that come into play at all here? When you start talking about imposing morality, what we're really saying is that man doesn't have the capacity to choose and even choose God. And how might that hurt our evangelism?
Oh, there's at least two ways.
Yeah.
I mean, if the objection is, I want to obey Jesus, but what about free will? It sounds like to me that person's saying, I want to follow Jesus, but other people have a right not to. So I don't want to impose them. And I'm like, well, we just got to welcome you to the faith called Christianity, which doesn't actually permit that. So every knee has an obligation to bow to Jesus Christ. So if our interlocutor here is saying, I think we live in a world in which it's up to the individual as to whether he serves Jesus or not. And I say, well, then what's hell going to be about? What's that about?
Yeah.
The other line might be, are people free to choose God? We get confused about what free will actually is. You can't understand freedom of the will without putting it in its covenantal context. Adam, when God made Adam, he made him upright and he made him with a free will. Disobeyed at the tree. And when he did, there was a genuine death. but there was a genuine spiritual death that took place. Well, maybe when he has a son, he'll come out free will again, and he'll have his own individual choice as whether to love God or not love God. And the answer is, nope, that's not how it works. You say, what kind of world am I living in? I thought I lived in the land of the free and the home of the brave and individual rights and liberties.
Right.
Are you meaning to tell me that Adam, our first father, sinned to the tree in such a way that his son came out lacking what his father had, which was free will?
Yeah.
And I'm going, that's the game. Like that's the game that God's playing. That's the arrangement he set upon us. That's what we call that the covenant of life with Adam. Some call it the covenant of works. And God put him in a covenant such that when he fell, his will now was fallen and couldn't love God, and every single offspring is in that condition. For Christians, they are born again, they're made alive, and now they have a free will. Okay, so you and I, Christians, and all the other Christians out there, actually have a free will. One, again, that can love God again. But we believe that everyone who's outside of Christianity is actually still dead and dead in their sin.
So it seems to me that they have they're missing the what God's character is all about.
Yes.
They have a false picture of God.
It is, yeah.
So one of the problems that we see, first off, with the term Christian nationalism itself, is it's a blending of Christian as a religion and nation as a civil power. And where we see that reflected is in Catholicism with unum sanctum, where the Pope is said to wield two swords, the civil and the temporal, or the spiritual and the temporal. And so Christian nationalists are seeking that kind of dual sword, if you will, to wield in both civil power and moral power or religious power. But one of the things that we see right here is when he's referencing Isaiah 65, when we go to Isaiah 65, sure, it does talk about, for the child shall die 100 years old, but the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed. There's another version, though, that clarifies that and makes it a little clearer. And it says, no longer will babies die when only a few days old. No longer will adults die before they've lived a full life. No longer will people be considered old at 100. Only the cursed will die that young. You see, Isaiah 65 has a lot of parallels between Revelation 21. So the former things will not be remembered, Isaiah 65, verse 17. It speaks about the new heavens and new earth. We see the old order of things has passed away in Revelation 21, verse 4. The sound of weeping and crying will be heard in it, Jerusalem no more, in 65, verse 19. In Revelation 21, God will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more mourning, crying, or pain. 65 in Isaiah refers to Jerusalem by name. Revelation 21 refers to New Jerusalem. Now, there's a lot more of these parallels that I can go through in Isaiah 65 and 66 with Revelation 21 and 22. But this idea that somehow it's referring to a golden age here on this earth really doesn't come from the Bible, certainly not Isaiah or Revelation, but it does come from Greek mythology, specifically the works and days of Hesiod, which was a description of a temporal decline of the state of peoples through 5 ages, gold being the first and one during which the golden race of humanity lived, and the end of the first age was the silver, bronze, heroic age, and the 5th age, current age, being iron. Kind of a vague allusion there, perhaps back to the image of Daniel 2, but nevertheless, there's this idea of the golden age denoting a period of primordial peace, harmony, stability. And so they're trying to establish this golden age, but the Bible doesn't support that that's going to be the case. In fact, in Matthew 24, God's true people at the end of the age are fleeing persecution. They're not ruling. Yep. And in Revelation chapter 6, we see kings of the earth fleeing into the hills when Christ returns, not reigning with, as Christian kings, if you will, but kings that are opposed to God's government.
So here we have a slide about premillennialism versus postmillennialism. We need to understand the time of the end quite well as Seventh-day Adventists so that when somebody comes up to us and has these ideas of postmillennialism, we can actually combat them, like you're saying, with Scripture, so that we can understand how to give a good answer for what we believe. Because this is going to become increasingly popular. people are going to see a Christ figure walking the earth and showing great signs and wonders. How are we going to make sure we're not deceived? You know, one of the other things that you see really going forward now is this idea of the Crusades. You see this this picture here on the left, the Southern Spear. This is actually put forth by the U.S. Southern Command's Facebook page. This is an official government Facebook page, and they show a soldier there with a helmet, and on the helmet it has I think that's a Jerusalem cross, if I'm not mistaken there, James?
Yeah.
In addition to that, you also have Representative Andy Ogles, Congressman Andy Ogles from Tennessee. Look what Congressman Andy Ogles is actually showing there. It's showing basically Crusader imagery. And of course, we know that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has multiple Crusader tattoos on him. He has the Jerusalem cross there on his chest, and then he has Deus Vult there on his arm. Basically, God wills it. That is a Crusader's cry. And so we're seeing this throwback to the Crusades. And I thought it was really interesting that you have even like the Knights Templars, which, you know, the Knights Templars are inherently Catholic, but if you look at some of their imagery of what they're posting on Twitter, what does that make you think of? What kind of impression does that give you right there?
Well, for me, it's utter disregard of the words of Christ, because he said, "My kingdom was not of this world, for if it were, then would my servant fight."
And he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. You see blood on that sword in the middle picture there, and there's a big dichotomy there.
Yes. But this is something that they've been continuing to post. Hail Christ, and they show him surrounded by warriors. And like you said, James, is his kingdom of this world? If it was, then his servants would fight. You also have this video clip right here, which actually got taken down off of the Knights Templars Twitter. I went back to try and find it, and it's no longer there, but I did find this initially, and I recorded it myself, so I know it came from their Twitter page, and you can see that they're depicting something that is violent, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is their depiction of what serving God is.
Evidently, their God is too weak, because they say, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to pray away the Islamic threat.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to have to step up, because whatever God they're serving isn't powerful enough to do it for them.
Right, and much of their imagery is about is anti-Islam. Most of it is.
Yeah.
Now, we have previously talked about Jonathan Berry here, and he is Trump's nominee for the Solicitor of Labor, and he was confirmed by the Senate on October 7th of 2025. And, he wrote the section in the Project 2025 handbook that called for Congress to encourage communal rest by amending the Fair Labor Standards Act to require workers be paid time and a half for hours worked on the Sabbath. So we have previously talked about Jonathan Berry and discussed Project 2025, discussed this page actually in great detail. And we'd actually, James, you had actually reached out and spoken to him both on the phone and in text message as well.
Yeah.
But, he got confirmed October 7th, 2025. What's interesting is if you look at the U.S. Department of Labor's Twitter since October 21, so just 2 weeks after he was confirmed into his position, for the first time, you actually start seeing reference to Sunday. Now, if you go back on Twitter and you search this social media account previously for the word Sunday, you never see where they previously had posted, they themselves. I think they'd shared a post at one point, but you never see where they actually made their own post discussing Sunday. But now, ever since Jonathan Berry, about 2 weeks after he was confirmed, very frequently, not every Sunday, but very frequently, and more recently, I think every Sunday since about December 21, we've seen reference to Sunday, and every time it's with this kind of reverie, right? You see that? It's like this snowy town with like a church, and everybody's going to church or sitting in a church pew. They're all going to church on Sunday. Happy Sunday, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Happy Sunday.
It's like a throwback to the good old days,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The reason we bring up Jonathan Berry, though, and the reason we talk about the Heritage Foundation, who came out with Project 2025, is because they have been more in the news here just in the last few days. So take a listen to this video right here.
From the people who brought you Project 2025, prepare yourself for 2026. The Heritage Foundation's policy priorities are out for next year, and they are building on what the Trump administration has already achieved. The conservative movement is calling it the golden age of choice.
The golden age is a choice. It's a choice to prioritize families and empower local communities.
A choice to find dignity in prosperous and honorable work.
A choice to prioritize our nation's safety, protecting our homeland and standing strong against foreign threats.
Joining me now, David Graham, staff writer for The Atlantic and author of The Project, How Project 2025 is Reshaping America. David, welcome. Good to have you on the show here. So next year's wish list, which was originally released in March, it's not quite the 900-page document that Project 2025 was, but how do their plans build on what they've achieved thus far?
Well, there's a sort of direct connection between a lot of these things, whether it's taking on China, whether it's putting family first, drilling for oil and gas. These are the same sort of priorities we see in Project 2025 and the same things we've seen the administration pursue.
So Russell Vought, a lead architect of Project 2025, now inside the administration as the Office of Management and Budget Director. And here he is last week. Listen with me.
Political capital is not our scarcest resource. You can always build it. Time is our scarcest resource. And so that's why we are going at it with everything we've got and trying to bulldoze bureaucracy where it exists.
Time is our scarcest resource. So how effective has Vought been carrying out his policy priorities? And what does this foreshadow about his vision for next year?
One of the animating ideas behind Project 2025 was that if the right wanted to get things done, they needed to do it really fast. And I think that has a lot to do with the kind of blitzkrieg approach the Trump administration has taken, moving very quickly to shutter agencies, lay people off, attack existing programs, before really anybody has a chance to react to that, whether that's Republicans or Democrats or the courts. I think that's one reason why they've managed to enact so much of Project 2025. And I think it makes sense that Vought would be saying the same thing now. They also know the midterms are bearing down on them. They can read the polls as well as anybody, and they see that there's a good chance they're going to lose control of at least the House. And so they want to make as much progress as they can before those elections.
David, you wrote this week about the president showing signs that he has lost his physical stamina to be president. And considering these concerns, will the rest of his term be as effective carrying out his policy priorities? I mean, is he the only one who can do it? Or is he surrounded by people he can effectively say to them, I want this done, so go do it, and they will without blinking?
I mean, part of the idea of Project 2025, maybe ironically, is to kind of build a right-wing deep state. So Trump was essential for winning the office and for starting off in the way that he did and sort of bullying Congress into submission. But one thing they wanted to do was to get people in positions of power, Russell Vought being one, but really even more in lower positions of power, appointments throughout the government of positions we don't think about, who can then keep enacting these things. And it's a long-term project for them, not just for the Trump administration. So now that Trump has put them in positions of power, they almost don't need him as much and they can kind of run on their own.
So one of the things that is notable that they came out with on January 8, the Heritage Foundation came out with a 250-page document that was basically their plans to help America for the next 250 years. And ABC News actually picked up on it a day later on January 9th right here, and they start commenting on what's actually in that report. And guys, what do we see mentioned right there?
Universal Day of Rest. How about that?
Is that surprising?
And Project 2025 is what, at around 50% completed now?
Yeah.
And it's not even a year in.
I still got some Sunday pastor friends of mine who are saying, but Trump distanced himself from it during his election. I'm like, are you going to really say that after he literally installed the guy who wrote Chapter 18 calling for blue laws? Come on, it seems like there's any excuse being come up with now to just avoid the reality of Adventists are right about this.
Yeah, Trump, he distanced himself when he was running for president, but now it's pretty clear.
Yeah.
That's a political move.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But you know what? It should make us sad because it's like an ostrich with its head stuck in the sand, right? And it's spiritual blindness at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And these are our brothers and our sisters. We're one big human family. And these are our brothers and our sisters that are deceived. And the wool has been pulled over their eyes to a degree where they cannot see. And many of them refuse to see. And that's a product of sin right there.
Yep.
You know, spiritual things are spiritually discerned. We have to have that relationship with Christ in order to understand these events. But this is why we need to reach out to them and say, wake up.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the internals of this document right here, what are they pushing for?
I mean, one thing that struck me is that sentence right there. These places serve as a sort of legal reservoir. So they say blue laws persist in some form in close to 28 states. These places serve as a sort of legal reservoir. Once their day of rest laws are abolished, they are very hard to restore. A uniform day of rest that limits commercial activity can provide temporal boundaries. So hold on. They're pointing out a problem of having state laws that are hard to restore. So what does that suggest about a uniform day? Doesn't that sound like to you guys maybe they're suggesting that it ought to be a national day?
100%.
Uniform?
Yeah.
That's a continuation of the same thought. It's like, here's the problem. These places serve as a sort of legal reservoir. Once their day of rest laws are abolished, they're very hard to restore. A uniform day of rest that limits commercial activity. It's like the answer to the problem is in the next paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
They are literally calling for a national Sunday law. It says Sunday closing laws up at the top. They're talking about Sunday. That's the only day they mention in this.
So guys, I got a question for you. How do we get this loud cry louder? I mean, because I see this right here, and I've seen people sharing it a little bit, and maybe I'm my immediate set of friends, but what can our viewers do out there who are watching this and seeing this and realizing the gravity of this, and how can they join the cry to call this out?
I think our appeal should be to ask our viewers to get in the fray, because we're not somebody special.
Yeah.
None of us are pastors. None of us are anybody special. We all have normal jobs. We're just trying to wake people up. We're trying to wake our fellow church members up. We're trying to wake our friends that are out there in the world, our coworkers, up, and trying to say, listen, we know how this story ends. We got to get ready. And I think that the way we have our audience get involved is by being more proactive to their sphere of influence. And a lot of people are like, well, I don't have much of a sphere of influence. Everybody does. Everybody interacts with somebody. We need, if you study prophecy, the only response to this that is going to help anything is going to be the pouring out of the latter rain. We need to be praying for the outpouring of the latter rain. And we need to be stepping up and saying, here am I, send me. Let me go out. Let me talk to my neighbors. Let me show them what's going on. Let me explain it to them very simply. Let me play some of these clips right here that are so open-faced. We have to do that. The message has to go out. I don't know. I mean, what are your guys' thoughts? How do we get this? How do we wake people up?
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be anything elaborate. It can be something simple, practical. Your coworkers, you can just say,
hey, check this out.
Yeah, have you been watching the news lately? Some crazy things have been going on. Check this video out. It doesn't have to be, an hour-long sermon that you tell them or you show them or anything like that. You don't have to get real deep or personal in their life. You can just be like, hey, I saw this last week. It's pretty crazy. What do you think?
Yeah, one thing I was thinking is we need, to some of these events coming up. This is 2026. We've got a whole nation's worth of events taking place, patriotic events in D.C., and events that are going to be occurring around the country. I know Turning Point USA has their tours coming up. We need Adventist people out there organizing groups. Get your local church, get your friends, get a group together, go to some of these places, pass out great controversies. We need people that, and some of these are organizing online. There's different groups that are organizing that you can be a part of. Check social media. Some of the publishers for the Great Controversy in different places like Streams of Light and some of the others I have seen in the past do events like that. But we need people showing up. We need people on the ground passing out great controversies and warning.
I'll tag right into that. Is something I've tried to do is share with people. I look through my phone contacts, and past jobs I've been at, past coworkers, and I'll send them a little blip saying, "Hey, here's what's going on. Have you seen this?" And I'll direct them to a link to the Great Controversy, starting with, is it chapter 35, Liberty of Conscience?
Yep.
Read from there to the end, and you will see a replay of what's happening in the news right now.
Yes.
I've been doing the same with my old coworkers too. It's easier to do, I suppose, if you've told them years ago, like, "Hey, this is what's coming," and then a lot of times I'm able to like text message back and say, "Hey, do you remember I told you this like years ago?" It's not crazy. What we've said is truth. Here it is unfolding exactly as we told you.
But why is it that the Heritage Foundation titled this "Saving America by Saving the Family Foundation for the next 250 years"? Well, because this year is the 250th anniversary of this country as a nation.
Yeah.
Think about it. We were born in 1776, and it is now 2026. It's 250 years.
Yep.
And so when they're writing this document, what's going through their mind? They're thinking, okay, we've done a lot in 250 years. We're now the most powerful country in the world. What are we going to do now?
This is interesting because as I'm reading this, and I'm not taking political sides, but the Make America Great push, right? And then you have Saving America. They're kind of tagging along with what Trump is saying, hey, this is how we make America great again.
In many ways, this document right here is kind of an affront to God about the nearness of Christ's return.
That's true.
At least in the clouds of glory, at least the way we see it. Now, they may be thinking that Christ is going to come on this earth to establish a kingdom at some point, but maybe for them, postmillennial is going to be at the end of the 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So they don't seem to think Christ is coming anytime soon.
No.
How far off do you see a Christian nation, like a full-on Christian theocracy?
250 years.
250 years.
Yeah, honestly, that's yes.
What you see. But you do think it will happen?
Yes, I do. We're not going to usher in anything ourselves. We're really genuinely pioneers.
And this is a recognition of the fact that we recognize that our world is broken and America is broken, which obviously we see firsthand, but this is almost like, hey, this is the solution, guys.
Yep.
And we don't believe it is.
But, there's been a lot of other things in the news as well. We actually just had the Venezuelan president snatched by Delta Force and taken to the United States, and where he will go on trial. And look what some of the Catholic imagery out there. Trad West is a Catholic Facebook page, and look what they posted as kind of a funny meme there on their Facebook page. Hearkening to the fact that Maduro was rather against the Catholic Church to some degree, and now he's gone. If you actually read what the Vatican relations to Venezuela, it actually was worsening to a good degree. And there was some kind of terse back and forth between the Venezuelan government and the Catholic Church. And eventually what happened is Pope Leo actually kind of suggested that there may be another way to address the conflict, suggesting U.S. economic pressure. Now, we really don't know what happened behind the scenes, so I'm not trying to draw some secretive conclusion here. I just thought it was interesting. What are your guys' thoughts about that?
Well, my thoughts were, as the first beast of Revelation 13, where we read that who can make war with the beast. And
yes.
And my thoughts were, if you're going to make an image to that, you kind of got to make the United States like, who can make war with the United States?
Well, this is true. This is true. Yeah.
So in that sense, it's definitely a flex of military power.
It is. One of the things that just came out here recently is that the U.S. used sonic weapons on the Venezuelan troops. And this was actually just posted yesterday on January 11th when we're shooting this. And it says, at one point they launched something, I don't know how to describe it. He said, it was like a very intense sound wave. Suddenly I felt like my head was exploding from the inside. Those 20 men, without a single casualty, killed hundreds of us, a witness claimed. We had no way to compete with their technology, with their weapons. I swear I've never seen anything like it. Isn't that interesting? Sonic weapons right there. But, we're going to face a time of trouble when every form of technology, drones, I'm sure they're going to try and use stuff like this. They're going to try and track down whoever is a dissident, right? But we know that the Bible says that no weapon formed against us shall stand.
Amen.
Amen.
You know, this kind of throws back to actually one of the very first videos we did on this YouTube channel. Before we actually had this studio, we had a little bit lower budget quality production, but there was a video that I did on World War II and how there were Seventh-day Adventists that were in the nuclear bomb blasts within 1 mile of the epicenter, where it was like the vaporization zone, basically. And one of them, she saw this bright flash of light. She saw the plane. She saw this bright flash of light. She dropped to her knees and she started to pray, and everything went dark. And she was saved.
Mm.
This fierce wind ripped around her, ripping the building apart, tearing it to shreds. And she dropped to her knees, and everything in that moment just stood still, and she was fine. She walked out unscathed, and it was more than just one. And so the thing that I think of is, be it sonic weaponry or drones like they're using over in Ukraine, or even an atom bomb, God can put a hedge of angels around us that can stop every form of destruction against us. No weapon shall stand. And to me, that's encouraging. That shows that God is the one who's in control of this. He's the one who's holding back the four winds of destruction. Like, how powerful is that?
I had a recent story, and we're seeing these happen even now. This is not just World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So I read an interesting story recently about some of the stuff that's taking place over in Ukraine. AWR has been sharing some of those stories, and there's a couple of wonderful books that they're putting out. I had one of them that I shared a little story online, and it's now been seen by many, many people. But the Lord is working with his Adventist people over in Ukraine to save them through miracles, dreams, visions, incredible miracles that are saving people's lives. So it will happen for us at the end of time as well.
Yep. But, you know, it was interesting to listen to what Tucker Carlson had to say about the Venezuelan president being snatched. Just take a listen to what he had to say here.
The United States has moved into the imperial phase of empire, leaving the republic, shifting to empire. And that's a pretty familiar life cycle for civilizations. And so we sort of roughly know what will happen. The first thing that's going to happen is that the energy and the power will vest in the executive and not the legislative branch. Congress will inevitably wither. It already is. They were not consulted before we took out the president of Venezuela. They had no role in this whatsoever. They have a constitutional authority here that was ignored, as it has been many times in the past. When was the last time Congress did something of note? It's been a long time. And that, if you take 3 steps back, is probably not surprising. That's the way these things go. The power moves to the executive, to Caesar or the president or whatever you call him, to the national leader. And that trend will accelerate over time for certain, not decelerate. And that has all kinds of implications, one of which is national elections are now everything. It's always mattered who the president is. Now it matters more than ever because the president has the ability to act unilaterally in the way we just saw.
You know, this is not a concern that is new. It's interesting that if you go back in the history of Adventist religious liberty, the American Sentinel back in the late 19th century actually warned about this for our country as well. And there were some cartoons. One of the cartoons that I found was, at the time, they were looking at Philippines and Hawaii, and there was kind of this image of liberty being taken to the high hill as Christ was when he was tempted by Lucifer. And liberty was being tempted by despotism and imperialism. These days, I would say perhaps maybe it might be things like Venezuela and Greenland that our nation is being tempted by. And, you know, we're not saying when we play this video that the Sunday law is going to come through an imperial ruler alone. We obviously know that it's going to be the populace that demands it.
Yes.
So we need to be clear about that. But as Rome fell and went from a republic to an empire, it ultimately went to a theocratic government, and that's where this is headed. And it's coming fast on the heels of it, where church and state are going to unite.
And, you know, we've seen all this understanding of the Gilded Age, right? What's fascinating to me is not just that we're talking about the Gilded Age. I mean, obviously, we had the Gilded Age back in the 1800s as well.
Hmm.
This notion of the golden age, Trump making the Oval Office out of gold and this $200 million ballroom that features gold heavily, and the fact that on his Truth Social page he actually posted an AI-generated video of the Gaza Strip back. This was a while ago, but it actually showed in the AI-generated image a golden statue of Trump, and it just kind of harkens to Daniel 2, right, where they had a test there about this golden statue, but I just think it's interesting that they're wanting to usher in this 1,000-year golden age. Take a listen to this clip right here where they kind of talk about that just a little bit more.
What do you say to those Americans who are looking for work as you are trying to lay the groundwork here?
Well, like the Department of Labor has been working on, we're about to enter the golden age for the American workforce.
The golden age for the American workforce. We have Representative Andy Biggs here. Take a listen to what he had to say at the Turning Point USA Student Action Summit in Tampa, Florida.
We are going to enter Trump's new golden age. Do you want to enter that golden age? America is back. America is back. And we are on our way to once again being the shining city on the hill. We are the beacon of freedom and hope. And you are the generation called for this time.
It's fascinating to hear things like that, and then also to understand that, Turning Point, its founder, obviously, we just did an episode about Charlie Kirk here with his book, Stop in the Name of God, and how that book was being promoted by Donald Trump. We discussed this in our previous episode, and how he was promoting a book about the Sabbath. Take a listen to what his widow, Erica, has to say here about the book and what it contains.
The depth of understanding of this topic is amazing, and how he weaves in the Bible and how he weaves in all these different interesting facts and history of the Sabbath, and then even certain laws like blue laws that we had here in this country, and how we have changed as American citizens without having that rest built into our country, and how that's actually impacted us as a whole, as a body.
So what do you guys make of that? She's kind of speaking of it in a positive light, isn't she?
Well, remember, she's coming from a Catholic background, so for her, it's logically consistent with Catechism 2188 to legally institute a day for Sunday, to protect Sunday, as they call it, protect it by infringing on the rights of others.
Mm-hmm. And then you also had some other voices here.
We have not yet tried to create the Christian nation that America may yet become.
I have to tell you, Jack, I've prayed so many times to Charlie and to God to give me the right guidance on how to handle this whole thing.
I want to see church attendance go up. He said we should have a day of rest or honor the Sabbath.
To save the greatest nation, this great republic of ours, the best way to restore it is to return and restore those foundations, to return God to the top and to remember who we are beneath him.
Did I hear that right? She was saying she was praying to Charlie?
Yep. So give me a scripture verse that you could tell someone that is not according to the Bible.
Ecclesiastes 9:5.
Mm-hmm.
The living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything.
There's another text we could go to, another failed example in the Bible, and that would be at a time when Israel as a nation, in their apostasy, wanted a king to rule them. They wanted Saul, and Saul ruled them.
Mm-hmm.
And what did he do at the very height of his apostasy? He went to the witch of Endor and sought a familiar spirit and sought to bring Samuel up from the grave. And so here she's seeking to bring Charlie back up from the grave, like Saul at his worst.
The thing that startles me is how many people believe that Saul actually brought up Samuel with that witch. Instead of it being a familiar spirit, it's like...
Well, the word says that God would not answer by prophet or by seer. And yet people think that somehow this pagan witch had enough power to override God's revealed will, which was to not speak to Samuel by prophet. And so somehow this witch was able to bring Samuel up. And then this vision says, tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Now, hold on. He just got done breaking the law of God and sinning. Is he really going to the same place where Samuel went? Like, he's not going to hell. He's going to heaven, wherever Samuel's at? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Let's see here. There's another clip right here. Take a listen to this clip that came as well.
Charlie's book is about the Sabbath. In Hebrews 4, it talks about Jesus is our Sabbath day rest. See, I believe that we have something that the world doesn't understand, and that is peace. And when you actually walk in peace and you realize that as much as I want this world around me to be beautiful, as much as I want a utopia, as much as I want to fix everything and just put it all together and have it just be perfect, what the Bible teaches us is that until Christ is involved in that process, that can never happen.
What do you make of that?
That's alarming.
Well, my thoughts are in some ways is it felt like he might be a little bit internally disagreeing with Charlie because, a lot of times when people say Jesus is my Sabbath rest, they do that as an excuse to not keep it.
Yes.
So and the other thing too is Hebrews 4 doesn't say that anywhere.
No.
Like it says to actually enter into God's rest, like
there actually says on the seventh day.
Well, yeah, and it says there remaineth therefore a Sabbath rest for the people of God. Therefore, we're to rest as God rested in verse 10.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't say Jesus is our Sabbath rest, like what he's saying.
Now, James, tell me about this next clip right here. You just found this clip.
Yeah, so this is Pastor Dale Partridge. He just was in a discussion with, I think it was a video clip featuring, like, what is Christian nationalism? And, of course, they had Stephen Wolfe and some other people up in there talking about blue laws again. Stephen continues to beat the drum of, the first thing that he would like to do is Sunday blue laws. But they also had some things to say about religious liberty and our nation's history. Let's take a look.
I think that when the founders founded America, the unfortunate reality is they used the word religion instead of Christianity so many times. I believe when they talked about freedom of religion, they're talking about freedom of denominational choice. They're not talking about necessarily, the focus wasn't a freedom over choosing which gods to worship. Though there are some instances and quotes, but generally speaking, the vast majority of the founders and the founding fathers and the founding political agents of America were thinking of freedom of religion in that aim. Freedom of religion is, in all intents and purposes, a really bad idea. I don't want freedom of religion because I don't think Jesus wants freedom of religion. I don't believe he's interested in the freedom of religion. I think it's a violation of the first commandment to have the freedom of religion. There shall be no worship of any other gods. And so the reality is that truly I believe that a great way to love the culture is to make sure that society is ruled by Christian rulers and under a Christian government. I think that's the greatest way that you can love your neighbor. And if we're thinking that the first and greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself, there's no better way to love your neighbor than to make sure that they're ruled by godly people. A great way to hate your neighbor is to make sure that they are ruled by godless people or by pagan people or people who hate God and are passing laws that are out of step with his holy and righteous law.
So he's mentioned freedom of religion, but he didn't mention freedom from religion. That was completely absent.
There's some scripture texts that speak to a little bit about what, a little bit against what he's saying here. Even God himself granted Israel the opportunity to choose this day whom ye will serve. Joshua gives the people this opportunity. Choose ye this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So there was a choice offered to ancient Israel. 1 Peter 5:2 says, feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint or not by force, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. So there's this call here for Christian liberty. And the moment that you say, oh, well, we're talking about denominational liberty, that's only one step closer to ultimately determining which denomination and which tenets in the majority you're going to actually promote. Mm-hmm. So it's very much going to take our nation towards tyranny when it comes to religious liberty.
The problem I have with this is he says, well, it's as long as you're Christian, right? Then that's what's being talked about. But the problem is within Christianity itself, the view of God, who God is, changes dramatically. Calvinistic, Arminian, Catholic, Protestant. Those are very different pictures of the God of the Bible. Okay, yeah. So I mean, you think of Catholicism, a harsh God who is willing to torture people in hell for trillions of years. Is that a God of love? You're worshiping a deity who you may say has the same name, but their conceptions of who God is entirely different from my conception of who God is.
It's entirely different from what the Bible teaches.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so how can you say, oh, well, as long as it's all Christianity, then you're worshiping the same God? No, that's not the case at all.
It comes back to religion of force.
And how many times have we been told that we're not worshiping the same God because of our Adventist beliefs as well?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Definitely a slippery slope there.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I noticed interesting, how he said to love your neighbor is to let them live under Christian law, basically, what he's saying. So it's like, we're going to force this on you. That's the loving thing to do.
Right.
So you can see where that would go.
There was a cartoon actually back in the American Sentinel that talked about the hopeless idea of reform. And it pictures this gentleman at the base of a mountain ordering a crew to level the mountain. And, the mountain is like this road to life. And it has this text at the bottom. It says, the would-be reformers of the day who depend upon the power of civil enactments to reform society have summoned the legislators of the land to a hopeless task, namely that of making the narrow way broad and smooth, and the broad way narrow and difficult. In other words, they want laws that will make it easy for people to do right and difficult to do wrong. The illustration shows this modern type of reformer addressing a group to those whom he looks for the realization of this idea to reform. He calls upon them to level down the mountain up which the narrow way leads to life, and to make this way broad and smooth so that it can be easily traveled, and at the same time fill up the broad way leading to destruction so that it will be made a difficult path. The narrow way cannot possibly be made smooth. Right doing cannot be made easy by any human power. For help in traveling the way of life, the soul must look alone to God.
Mm-hmm. Amen. We're talking about this understanding right here of who all is included in this. As long as you're Christian, right? Take a listen to this next clip of who they think is included in and excluded from the Christian label based off of their understanding.
I said, here's 5 criteria for voting. Number 1, America should be a Christian nation. I'm a Christian nationalist. And so, yes, I would require a public profession of faith. You should be a Christian. Well, what kind of Christian, Joel? A creedal, historic creed Christian. You should have to publicly affirm the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed. Well, what about Catholics? Could they vote? Yes. Well, what about Eastern Orthodox? Yes. Well, what about Baptists and Anglicans and Episcopalians and Presbyterians? Yes. What about Mormons? No. It's a cult. No, they don't believe that Jesus is the creator. They believe that he is the first created. They believe he's the first created, but not creator. They're non-Trinitarian. No, of course, they can't vote. They're not Christian. Jehovah's Witness, what about them? Nope, they're not Christian. Seventh-day Adventists, nope, they're not Christian. It is a cult. Okay, but what about Muslims? No way. What about Jews? No way. Hindus? No way. Atheists? No way. Well, what about white European descendants who worship Thor? No way.
I don't know, man. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm looking at his criteria for voting up at the top. So I think a lot of the audience might have a problem with number 2 there.
Second, you must be a male adult. No women voting. No.
Well, that's actually something they stand behind, though. A lot of the Christian nationalist movement is they believe that they should repeal. Is it the 19th Amendment I'm thinking? Yeah. They believe in repealing that so that women do not vote.
In my ideal society, we would vote as households. And I would ordinarily be the one that would cast the vote, but I would cast the vote having discussed it with my household.
But what if there's your wife doesn't want to vote for the same person as you?
Right. Well, then that's a great opportunity for a good discussion.
There are some who have gone so far as to say that they want the 19th Amendment repealed.
I would support that. And I'd support it on the basis that the atomization that comes with our current system is not good for humans.
So rapid fire, the parallels between 1888 and now. You had the Asiatic flu that killed a ton of people. Now you had the COVID-19. You had the McKinley tariffs. Now you have the Trump tariffs. You had Pope Leo XIII. Now you have Pope Leo XIV. You had Grover Cleveland, who served 2 non-consecutive terms. You have Donald Trump, who served 2 non-consecutive terms. Only presidents in history who have done it. You've had an immigration crisis in the 1800s, 1888, 1890. You have an immigration crisis now. The National Reform Association.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. James, what other ones am I missing?
Push for Sunday law.
Push for Sunday law? Yeah, you had that.
The suffrage thing, that's one that I really didn't hit me until just this second. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at a cartoon right here, Political Junk Shop, and in it they're throwing the Constitution of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, and then equal suffrage.
So it's another parallel. It's another parallel
it is.
showing us that we're coming back to the same question again.
Hmm.
So this is another clip here that has Joel Webbon in it, and just listen to what else he has to say here as well.
60 years ago, we had some very intense laws on the books about sodomy, about race mixing, about blasphemy. Pornography was effectively illegal for a long time. There was a case with Larry Flint, which is what made it more permissive. And I think that we've clearly just gone way too far in the opposite direction.
Yes.
I don't want to go back to the Middle Ages. I don't even necessarily want to go back to the 1800s. But I think that we have definitely just gone so far in the opposite direction where anyone can recognize, you go into the city square and it's nudity, weed, public intoxication.
Even among Protestants, like I've gotten a lot of pushback, a lot of Protestants who are like devout in love the Lord and want to see America be a Christian nation. There's just something in their American DNA, when I would argue modern American, because America wasn't actually always this way. America we had blue laws, Sabbath laws. We had blasphemy laws, right? So it's not even just once upon a time in Israel. No, it's like it's been done before, it's been done recently, and it's been done here.
Right.
It actually is American. Actually is. Hasn't been for a little while, but actually is. But yet what I'm saying is that a lot of these Protestants who really love God, I'm not questioning that, and really want the country to be Christian, they still, anything within the first table. So they would differ from you. They'd be like, yeah, murder is capital punishment. But the example that you gave, like something that's exclusively only a desecrate, blaspheming the church, blaspheming Christ, they would say, well, yeah, that's really bad, and that should be frowned upon. But the state has no business enforcing any kind of moral law of God within the first table of the law. Love the Lord your God. Don't make any graven images. Don't take his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath. And the fact that you actually have like a case study that would fall in that category is based. I like it.
Good.
So,
okay, guys, did anybody else, was I the only one that noticed the big rack of booze in the background?
Yeah.
And then like right behind him, what do you see? The big sunburst. Yeah. I mean, the highest abomination of Ezekiel 8 was sun worship. And these guys are making images of the sun.
We also have Catholic voices that are pushing it as well. James, who is this right here?
Michael Matt, a very famous traditional Catholic influencer. Yeah, let's take a look.
We will be moving our show, the drop day for the Remnant Underground, from Sunday to Thursday night. I hope that works with everybody's schedule. I'm doing this really to encourage our viewers to do what my team and my family, we all want to do more of. We want to spend Sundays with God and family, the way it always used to be. We want to forget about the internet for a few hours, which is becoming a godless, toxic place. So at least on Sunday, we're not going to do any internet at all. Get rid of the phones and everything on Sunday in my home. And by the way, this idea of keeping Sunday holy, the fact that it was being violated, that Sunday was not being kept holy, even way back in the 19th century, this was a huge part of the message now of Our Lady of La Salette. If you read her message, a lot of it has to do with the desecration of Sundays, people stepping away from the practice of keeping Sunday holy, right? And we want to do something about that. Certainly on this show, we want to do our part. So we'll be moving to Thursday from Sunday.
Does this surprise you at all?
Nope.
Not after we've seen so much of it, right? But, we are seeing more commentary on Twitter as well. And these are just different individuals asking for Sunday Blue Laws to come back, saying that traditional family church attendance and Blue Laws are all good. Yes, I would love to see the return of Blue Laws. All businesses closed on Sunday. They should have kept the Blue Laws and kept Sunday as a day of rest and leisure. Bring back Blue Laws. We still have Blue Laws in some places. Basically, there's just a continuous push for Blue Laws in that's out there in society. And we know this is going to be this grassroots movement that's going to push towards the end of time. That's what we're looking at. James, who is this right here?
This is, I believe it's Joshua Hames is his name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he is pushing the rhetoric as well for Blue Laws. Let's take a look.
It depends. I mean, the left would if they could look at the law books from the founding of our nation, they would say, well, that's a Christian dictatorship. Yeah. We had Sabbath laws, right? No working on Sunday. This is legislated, right? We had Sabbath laws. We had blasphemy laws. They were actually prosecuted throughout our history, right? And that's up until just a few decades ago. Yeah. And so, was that a dictatorship? No. That was an experiment in the freest nation in the entire world, but it was a free Christian nation, right? And so, will it be like a dictatorship? No, but it will be dangerous for our enemies. So, and what I mean by that is that the leftist who wants to hold on to abortion as a sacrament. No, sorry. That's not. We say no more murdering babies because God says. Because God says. And so, Christian nationalism. It's not a dictatorship. Won't be a dictatorship. But it is as dangerous as the left says. It could be. It could be as dangerous as the left fears, because it is fundamentally, the goal of it is to reorder our nation in such a way where Christ is honored, and anyone who opposes Christ is opposed.
They might have cultural patterns that encourages family worship or some kind of family Christian instruction. They have those social aspects. But then there's also the legal aspects as well, that there would be a day of rest, that there would be Sabbath day. I think that's the most fundamental, the first law that our country should bring back at the county or state levels should be a Sunday Blue Law. And that should be to restrict ordinary commerce so that people would be encouraged to attend church. That's first step legally. But that's another way that people act. They elect people to office, and that office is an office of God for the good of the people. And one of those things should be that they act for the Christian good of the people.
One of the other things that I think is interesting is you've actually seen Apple computers recently came out with Your ID now on your iPhone. You can take your driver's license and kind of like your digital wallet where you put your debit card and credit card in your iPhone and then you can use Apple Pay to go somewhere and pay. You can now put your ID in your iPhone. And Glenn Beck actually had commentary about this, and he was talking with his co-host there about it. Take a listen to what they had to say about this.
I have to tell you, when you start putting everything, all records, all passports, it is your one universal key, and it's tied directly to online, where it's tracking everything, everywhere you go, every dollar you spent. This is just a very bad idea. Very bad idea. There's a story, I can't remember. It's called the Book of Revelation. I mean, how much clearer do you have to be where you can't go anywhere, you can't buy anything unless you have the mark? Well, I'm not saying Apple is coming up with the mark of the beast, but this is the technology that sure kind of fits it. And I just don't. Do you know why the Germans could round up so many Jews every night? IBM.
That's a book, right? IBM and the Holocaust.
IBM came up with the punch card system. You remember when I was a kid, I don't know if anybody else remembers this, but these computers were the size of rooms, and you had punch cards, and you would feed it in, and it would store the information on the punch card, okay? And so you could ask it anything on a punch card. You type it out, and it would punch out whatever, and you'd feed it in the computer, and it would feed out another punch card, and then you'd translate it, okay? They put everything onto these punch cards, where everybody lived, who was related to whom, et cetera, et cetera. So they could go in the afternoon and go, we got to clear out another 20,000. Where are they? Feed it into IBM, punch card it out, and you round everybody up, okay? That was then. There wouldn't be a Jew alive on the planet if we had digital IDs. Not a chance.
Yeah, and it does sort of rest on your belief we don't cross those lines, right?
Yeah.
That our government doesn't become Nazi Germany. And everybody who has faced a government like that has thought about, oh gosh, well, our government won't do this, right? Like everybody
think of COVID. We were on the air saying, like, in February? Can you imagine? Look at what they're doing. They're welding people into their houses.
Italy.
Yeah, in
I
China.
remember thinking Italy being, because China was China.
So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, he hit it on the head when he said, not in our country. That's never going to happen in America.
Right, yeah. I was doing a little research on this, and I found that Apple's first advertisement for the very first computer, take a look at it, bite into an apple, sold for $666.66. Bite into the apple. You think that's subliminal messaging? There's some people who have said that this was just, Steve Jobs liked repeating numbers and he thought it was kind of funny or whatever. But I'm like, we now have these iPhones. Is this iPhone eventually going to be used to track your location?
I was such a fan of Apple.
They make good computers, but, where is this heading? So, let's kind of pivot gears a little bit. We can see unequivocally that the end is approaching very rapidly. We can see that we're very near to Christ's second coming. And that should be a beacon of hope for us. We are Seventh-day Adventists. That word Adventist really means we're looking forward to, trying to hasten the second coming of Christ. And so to that end, we should have an understanding of end-time events. One of the things I've been thinking about, which this would take a little bit, we wouldn't be able to do it immediately, but I was wanting to do a video actually about end-time events, the sequence of end-time events. Does that interest you guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll ask our viewers, if that interests you, the viewer, drop us a comment down below in the comments section if you're interested in that, because I think it would be good to go through not just a broad overview, but we're going to go down into the weeds, really going through as much light as we can possibly gather from all the different Ellen White quotes out there, looking at the Bible, looking at the big picture, looking at where we are in society. So if that interests you, drop a comment down below. But, we do know that there are going to be some stages. There's some stages to this implementation of this National Sunday Law that is predicted. Vaughn, we have kind of talked about this amongst ourselves before, but there's about 4 stages roughly, from what I understand, to the Sunday Law implementation. What are your thoughts about that? What kind of Ellen White quotes have you found about that?
That's correct, and there are several. As we look at the Sunday Law, it's not going to just all of a sudden just be, boom, this is it. It's going to be gradual, just like anything, right? So the first stage is really refraining from work on Sunday. Are we kind of seeing that here? Are we kind of seeing that in the news?
That's what's being pushed, yeah.
And then that's followed by honoring Sunday, but you can still worship on whatever day, i.e. the Sabbath. You can still worship on both days, and that's okay, according to them. And then the third stage would be where we cannot worship on Sabbath. We can only worship on Sunday. And then fines and imprisonment will be imposed. The fourth stage, and again, not in America, but that would be where the death penalty comes for those who worship on Sabbath and disregard Sunday.
But this concept of these 4 stages, we're talking about it here quite definitively, and I'm sure there's some people in our audience who haven't ever heard of these 4 stages before. Vaughn, do you have any quotes there that we can kind of read through that'll help people see that we're not just speaking errantly here? There actually is some logical proof here in Ellen White's writings about these 4 stages and how they're kind of divided out.
So from the 9th volume of the Testimonies, it says, she says, the light given me by the Lord at a time when we were expecting just such a crisis as you seem to be approaching was that when the people were moved by a power from beneath to enforce Sunday observance, Seventh-day Adventists were to show their wisdom by refraining from their ordinary work on that day, devoting it to missionary effort. And then further she says, to defy the Sunday laws will but strengthen in their persecution the religious zealots who are seeking to enforce them. Give them no occasion to call you lawbreakers. If they are left to rein up men who fear neither God nor man, the reining up will soon lose its novelty for them, and they will see that it is not consistent nor convenient for them to be strict in regard to the observance of Sunday. Keep right on with your missionary work, with your Bibles in your hands, and the enemy will see that he has worsted his own cause. One does not receive the mark of the beast because he shows that he realizes the wisdom of keeping the peace by refraining from work that gives offense, doing at the same time a work of the highest importance, as we had talked about.
Okay, very good. And what about the second stage there?
As the storm approaches, a large class who have professed faith in the third angel's message, but have not been sanctified through obedience to the truth, abandon their position and join the ranks of the opposition. By uniting with the world and partaking of its spirit, they have come to view matters in nearly the same light, and when the test is brought, they are prepared to choose the easy, popular side, like we were talking about, where compromise. Men of talent and pleasing address who once rejoiced in the truth employ their powers to deceive and mislead souls. They become the most bitter enemies of their former brethren. When Sabbath keepers are brought before the courts to answer for their faith, these apostates are the most efficient agents of Satan to misrepresent and accuse them, and by false reports and insinuations stir up the rulers against them.
Makes me think about there's so many ex-Adventists now going about, and that's like the one point they want to make is try to paint Adventism in a bad light.
Yeah.
So true.
And I've seen that to such a degree where you see a lot of people walking away, and we know the shaking, it's very real. What else do you have there about the any other interesting quotes?
Third stage. As the controversy extends into new fields and the minds of the people are called to God's downtrodden law, Satan is astir. The power attending the message will only madden those who oppose it. The clergy will put forth almost superhuman efforts to shut away the light, lest it should be shined openly upon their flocks. By every means at their command, they will endeavor to suppress the discussion of these vital questions. The church appeals to the strong arm of civil power, and in this work, papists and Protestants unite. As the movement for Sunday enforcement becomes more bold and decided, the law will be invoked against commandment keepers. And there it is. And that's where the
You'll
fines
be thrown
and
into prison,
imprisonment.
fines. Yeah.
Correct. And then if we move then to the actual the fourth stage, which is the death penalty, fearful is the issue to which the world is to be brought. The powers of earth uniting to war against the commandments of God will decree that all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, shall conform to the customs of the church by the observance of the false Sabbath. All who refuse compliance will be visited with civil penalties, and it will finally be declared that they are deserving of death. On the other hand, the law of God enjoining the Creator's rest day demands obedience and threatens wrath against all who transgress its precepts.
And, there's actually many more quotes by Ellen White that kind of back up this notion, and there's actually an excellent presentation out there by Norman McNulty on YouTube that is the 4 stages of the Sunday law, and he kind of breaks each one down in greater detail. But you can see just from those that you shared the kind of logical train of thought as we go through them. But, the only thing that's going to get us through that is the work now, which is preparatory.
What I want to ask is, of those 4 stages, we understand that at some point, if you disobey the 4th commandment in the Decalogue, you receive what we know in Revelation as the mark of the beast, right? What stage is it in those four stages?
So this is where I've had some differing of opinions amongst Adventists that I've talked to, because some Adventists have said, well, the second stage and after is where the implementation of the mark of the beast is, where others say it's after the first stage. So I'll give you an example. Some people will say, well, you can keep going to church on Sunday and on Sabbath. And you can not work on Sunday, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. I mean, the Christians in the early church would not pinch incense before an idol. Okay, so if you serve God, you cannot serve God and a false god at the same time.
Okay, but I'm going to play devil's advocate. But James, I'm going there so I can witness to those Sunday keepers.
If you compromise on principle, begin to compromise like that, that opens the door that you're not going to be able to stand. Remember, the 3 Hebrews stood when they were commanded to bow down.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, they could have bowed down and not actually worshipped in their mind.
Let me just tie my shoes real quick.
Tie my shoe real quick, or my sandal, whatever. They could have done something like that and not worship in their mind and just, pray to God. But they didn't. They made that intentional stand.
That's exactly right. And also in the book of Daniel, where you see where the king made a law that only he could be worshipped for 30 days, nobody else. And you see there a sterling example of fidelity with Daniel. He could have just pulled the curtains shut, right?
Exactly.
But what did he do? He prayed in front of the window, my understanding,
yes,
where everyone could see. I mean, he didn't do it in secret. He didn't go in his closet. He wanted the world to see who his God was and that he was worshiping him.
Now, there is a quote in Spirit of Prophecy where Ellen White talks about we can hold religious revival meetings on Sundays, sing genuine Christian songs, etc. The nuance here is it's very clear from that statement that there's a big difference, and even week to week, I think all of us would recognize this. There's a big difference between holding evangelistic meetings like a Sunday through Friday and then the Sabbath service. The message that we're sending is not one of compromise where we're going to go into a Sunday-keeping church service with a bunch of Baptists or God forbid, a Catholic Mass, and send the signal that we're going along with their service and worshiping their God. The reality is when we're holding those religious revivals on Sunday, it's going to be an evangelistic meeting to teach people about the truth about serving and God on resting on the seventh day, prophecy meetings like we would any other day of the week, not sanctifying Sunday with like your assembly service that you would hold on a Sabbath. And I believe in the sight of God that it matters what signal, what message you're sending. And if you're sending a message by going to another church where they're checking your ID or whatever to make sure that you're officially fulfilling your requirement, that's sending a signal of I'm willing to compromise so that I can get by. And I'm not comfortable with that.
Well, the thing is let's say that you are using your phone to track your location. You've got location services turned on, right? And they're like, report to the closest church. Because eventually it's going to come down to that. I mean, you can't enforce this without technology, right? Yeah. Initially, it may start without some of those technology features, but it's going to go to that eventually. Yeah. You have to. And so the thing is if you're going there and you're like, well, I'll just, check in real quick, but I'm really there to witness. Are you doing it in the sight of God? The real thing is are you honoring God? I don't think so. But that first stage where it's about, don't work on Sunday. What about that? Should we say, you know what? I'm going to go out and I'm going to be the boldest. I'm going to be out there with my chainsaw cutting up trees. I'm going to be out there working as hard as I possibly can on Sunday just to kind of spite the law, basically. Should that be our stance?
We're also not to intentionally, or what do you want to say, throw mud in somebody's face or whatever. And the Bible, in fact, the Bible says, if when at all possible, live at peace with all people.
Yes.
And, as long as it doesn't violate God's 10 Commandments, and we are obligated to be good citizens.
Yes. Well, there is a quote by Ellen White where she talks about how when a Sunday law crisis comes, women are not supposed to go out and display their washing. Like you're not supposed to put the clothesline up, because they didn't have dryers back then, but, put your clothesline up and hang all the washing out and be like, see what I'm doing? I'm washing clothes. I'm working hard. Because, back in her day, washing clothes was a all-day, arduous task. It was not, the push buttons like what we have today. It was a lot of labor involved. And so she said, don't do that on Sunday. And so, but does that mean that we don't work on Sunday? I don't think so. I think that we should be working very hard for the saving of souls. I think we should be doing door-to-door canvassing. I think we should be doing everything that we can to try and get the message out there. And if that involves also work for our family, as long as you're not going and openly offending someone, yeah, get the work done. Work those 6 days like you're saying. But the first stage, I don't believe it's one where we have to go out there and try and prove to the world that we're already in deep opposition to them. But, there's also this idea that that fourth stage, right? The fourth stage of the death decree. I just have a question. When does the close of probation happen? Is it during which part, between which stage, or during which stage does the close of probation occur?
I believe it is at stage 4.
It is right before stage 4.
Stage 4.
And the reason we know that is because the close of probation, there's no event that sounds it. It's silent.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody knows that it has happened. But all of a sudden, the first plague starts being poured out, which is boils popping up. And this plague goes, and people start recognizing this is the plague of Revelation. And then after that, the waters turn to blood. Well, between the first and second plague, the death decree is passed. And there's a quote by Ellen White where she says that God will give them blood to drink because of their bloodthirstiness towards God's people, basically. I'm kind of paraphrasing. We'll put the quote in here in the video.
Almost like what happened with Haman.
Yeah.
Yeah, he makes the death decree, and then that's when it falls back on his own head.
One thing I just want to say really quick is knowledge alone won't save us.
That's right.
And we can't be mistaken. We can see all the signs, we can see what's happening, but that knowledge has no saving power.
Mm-hmm.
It's the relationship with Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And I know many well-meaning of my church brethren and sisters who sometimes may put those out of they don't have that balance of the relationship with Christ and the knowledge and education. And so this is just a note for me to say, we have to keep both. We have to. There has to be first and foremost relationship with Christ, but we have to couple that also with knowledge, because Christ Himself said, "What do you say? Watch and pray." Right.
Yes. Yep.
And so we are called to be watchmen. That's your show here. That's the purpose of this show, and God has called you for this to be able to be those watchmen. He's called us all as believers to be watchmen on the wall, to be able to sound the alarm.
Amen.
And that's the prayer that of my heart, of all of us here, is that we can help our brothers and sisters and those outside our denomination also to wake up and see what's going on.
It's exactly our purpose here. And that's why we're trying to combine two messages really here. It's a message of waking up, but we also come out with videos about righteousness by faith.
Amen.
And we actually have a very exciting episode that we're going to be releasing 1 week after this video is released about righteousness by faith. And I think our audience is going to enjoy watching it and going to enjoy that dialogue. And we also have several more episodes planned in the future. So to that end, if you would like to stay informed, make sure you hit that subscribe button at the bottom and hit like and comment down below if you're interested in some of our future episodes. But thank you so much for joining us for this special episode. Tune back in next week. You're not going to want to miss it. God bless.